She whispered. "I don't know how to be a wife," the rancher said. "Then just lie down and love me." Wyoming Territory, late autumn of 1878. The wind howled across the plains like a restless spirit, rattling the shutters of a small wooden cabin standing alone against the wild. Inside, the fire crackled low, casting amber light on rough-hewn walls, and the silence between two strangers bound by law, not love. Lila Byrne sat at the edge of the bed, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. Her dress, once white, now yellowed with age, hung loosely from her frame. She wore no flowers, spoke no vows, shed no tears. The ceremony had lasted no more than 10 minutes, the clerk barely looking up as he stamped the paper. Now, she was a wife, on paper, in name, but not in heart. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floorboards, as though they could swallow her whole. Behind her, boots moved slowly across the room. Eli McCrae placed his hat gently on a hook, shrugged off his coat. He didn't speak. He never said more than needed. A rancher, a widower. A man who had lived more years with silence than most lived with words. She could feel his presence behind her, solid, calm, heavy with the quiet weight of someone who did not ask for much, but gave more than he let on. "I do not know how to be a wife," she whispered. The words escaped her before she could catch them, fragile and shaking in the warm air. Eli paused. Then walked forward, slow and sure, until he stood before her. He crouched to meet her eye, not looming, not pressing, just there. "You do not need to know," he said gently. "Just lie down and love me." Not a command, not a plea, an invitation, offered in stillness, wrapped in care. She blinked. It wasn't lust in his voice, not expectation. There was no fire in his gaze, only warmth, a steadiness that settled into her skin like dusk. "Love you?" she murmured. "I don't even know what that means." "You don't have to," he said. "Not tonight." He stood and walked over to the chair by the hearth. Sat down without another word, picking up a small weathered book and flipping through its pages. Not reading, just giving her space. She stayed seated, the silence between them no longer a threat but a shelter. This marriage hadn't come from romance, it had come from necessity. Eli knew the danger she carried, the men who hunted her, the blood on her hands that wasn't hers. And he offered her one thing no man had ever given freely: protection. The name McCrae carried weight, and with it, the law. As his wife, no one could touch her, not legally, not easily. But sitting there, watching him in the firelight, she realized he had offered her something else too. Choice. She stood slowly, walked to the bed, and slipped under the quilt. Her hands trembled, her breath caught. The bed shifted gently moments later. Eli lay beside her, not touching, just breathing, steady, present. The wind screamed outside. Inside, silence bloomed like something sacred. She didn't know what love was, but tonight, for the first time in her life, she felt safe enough to want to learn. 3 months earlier, western Kansas, summer of 1878. The sun bore down like judgment, relentless over the dry hills and brittle grass. Dust clung to Lila Byrne's boots, her lashes, the hem of her patched skirt. Her breath tasted of it. She walked with her head down, ribs aching, steps steady only by force of will. She had not stopped running in days. In her hand she carried a small sack. In her chest, the weight of something no one could see. Dry Hollow wasn't much, just a saloon, a crooked jailhouse, and a few weathered homes leaning into the prairie wind, the kind of place where secrets vanished and reputations never did. She knew exactly what the townspeople would say when they saw her. They always did. Loose girl. Trouble. Too pretty to be honest. She had heard it all since the night her father died, gunned down on the church steps, spectacles shattered, blood soaking through the ledger he tried to protect. Elijah Byrne had been a preacher, not a fighter. But he had believed justice was for everyone, white, black, native, lost. They made an example of him for that. Lila had seen it. Every second. She hadn't screamed, not when they dragged him out, not when they burned the names. Not even when she woke days later in the woods, barefoot, her hands scraped raw and blood under her nails. Screaming wouldn't bring him back. Since then she drifted, town to town, job to job. She cleaned, she milked, she gutted fish. But mostly, she cooked. It was the one thing that made her feel like herself again. A woman who could cook beans without burning them could find work, even if no one trusted her name. So she kept her eyes low, her hands busy, and her voice quiet. Until the day the soldier arrived. He limped through the saloon door, pale and bleeding, with a Union medal on his chest and a bullet in his side. She dragged him behind the kitchen, stitched the wound herself, and brewed tea from dried wildflowers to break his fever. For 2 days, he muttered in his sleep names, places, numbers. Some of them she recognized from her father's ledger. When he finally woke, he looked at her and cried. "There's a ring," he said. "Lawmen, ranchers, railroad men, they're trafficking native children, selling girls across state lines. Your father tried to stop it, so did I. But you're the only one left alive who can still name them." Lila felt her stomach twist. "You're marked," he warned. "They won't stop, not until you're gone, too." Her voice barely held. "Then what do I do?" 2 nights later, her answer rode in on a black horse just after dusk. Eli McCrae, tall, quiet, worn like the land he came from. A rancher from Wyoming. The soldier called him a friend, a good man who once carried him bleeding across a battlefield and never asked for anything in return. "He owes me," the soldier said, "and I'm calling it in." Eli didn't speak much, just listened. When the story was done, he looked at Lila not with pity, not with fear, but with measured calm. "If you marry me," he said, "they can't take you, not legally, not from my land." The word hit her like a soft blow. "I don't need a wife," he added, "but I could use someone who knows her way around a cookpot." It almost made her laugh, almost. 2 days later, they left town, but not before she made one last stop. The church graveyard was nearly swallowed by weeds. She knelt at her father's grave, the wood cross cracked but still standing. She hadn't wept at the funeral, not after, not until now. Her voice shook as she whispered, "I won't let them win, Papa, not while I still breathe." The wind stirred the tall grass like it heard her vow. She rose, stronger, and no longer running. 2 weeks after their wedding, the town was small, just enough for gossip to fester, and not enough for it to die. Every man knew another man's story, and the ones they didn't know, they invented. Especially when it came to a stranger like Lila Byrne. They called her names behind her back, whispered when she passed the store. Some men stared too long, some women turned away, pretending not to see her plain dress and worn shoes. But Eli McCrae never said a word. He simply worked mending fences, feeding horses, chopping firewood before dawn. If Lila woke early, she'd find the chores done, the kitchen stocked, the tools sharpened. There was a rhythm to his life, and hers began to move to it. He didn't touch her, not unless she asked. He didn't ask for her time or her thoughts or her body. But each day, there was something small, intentional, that said he saw her. Like the morning she found her shoes gone. She'd left them by the door, cracked and flaking. They'd walked too many miles, and she felt every stone through them. By noon they were back mended, rough stitching, soles reinforced with saddlehide. No note, no mention, only the shoes. Lila stared at them, unsure whether to cry or smile. In the end, she wore them to the barn, where Eli was breaking in a skittish colt. She said nothing. Neither did he. But that night, she could still feel their warmth beneath her feet long after the fire died. It was always like that. When the town doctor refused her bruised wrist, Eli took her to a Comanche healer and waited outside in the cold. When the grocer shorted her change, Eli paid it without a word and never returned. When a ranch hand whistled too long at supper, Eli dismissed him before sunrise. He never raised his voice, never made a scene, But Jackson Ridge learned quickly if you crossed Eli McRae's wife, there were no second chances. Still, the whispers came. One afternoon, as Lila picked up fabric at the mercantile, two men leaned near the counter, loud enough for her to hear. "She ain't no wife. McRae could have had a real woman. More likely she's paying him back. Ain't no ring changes that." Lila froze, cotton slipping from her hands, her face flushed, shame and fury clashing in her chest. Then footsteps, firm, unhurried. Eli entered like a slow-moving storm. He didn't touch them, didn't raise his voice. He stood behind them, calm as winter, and said, "I do not hit weak men." The room went still. "But if either of you says her name like that again," his voice low, steady, "I'll make sure you forget how to walk." The words struck like thunder. The men backed away, mumbling apologies, hands raised. Eli didn't move until they were gone. Then he turned to Lila, his eyes softening slightly. "You get what you need?" he asked. She nodded, lips trembling. "Let's go home," he said. And that was it. No lectures, no vengeance, just presence. A man standing behind the woman the world tried to erase, making it clear she would not disappear again. That night, as Lila laid the mended shoes by the door, she looked at Eli where he sat by the fire, cleaning his saddle. His hands were rough, made for rope and war. But somehow, in their shadow, she felt safe. The mornings came cold now, mist rising from the fields, the breath of horses blooming in the air like ghosts. The McRae ranch stirred early, as it always had. Roosters, boots, the scrape of metal against hooves. But inside the house, there was quiet. Lila awoke to find her shoes gone. They had been near the door the night before, dusty and cracked from weeks of wear. She searched the room twice, half expecting mice to have dragged them off. But there were no signs of anything disturbed except her routine. A few hours later they reappeared. Set neatly outside her door, soles stitched with leather, seams reinforced by thick, careful thread. Not store-bought, not perfect, but whole again, strong. Like someone had cared enough to mend what most would throw away. She stared at them a long time. No note, no mention, just the quiet touch of someone who did not ask for thanks. That was Eli McRae. He spoke little, even at supper. He rode before dawn and returned after dusk, his hat always low, his words few. He had the hands of a man shaped by war and land, yet there was a steadiness to him Lila had never known in any man. A quiet loyalty. She learned pieces of him slowly, how he'd fought with the Union Army, how his wife died in the cholera winter of '75, how he buried her himself out back by the cottonwoods. He never talked about the war, never about her either, but every Sunday he rode to her grave and left a single wildflower. Lila never asked why. In town, things were different. The people of Jackson Ridge didn't trust easily, and they never forgot. They remembered Eli as the widower with the quiet rage and fast draw. But Lila they saw a mystery. A woman with no family, no history, no church ties, too pretty to be proper, too silent to be safe. The glares came first, then the whispers. "She ain't no better than the girls at the rail stop. Bet she ain't even his real wife." Eli never told her to ignore it. Instead, he stood behind her. At the mercantile, at the stables, in the pews. He never raised his voice, never reached for his gun, but people watched what they said when he was near. Except once. It was near dusk, outside the blacksmith shop. Lila had gone to pick up a repaired kettle. Eli stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets. The blacksmith's son, drunk, young, bitter, spit at the ground near her boots and laughed. Strange how a woman can go from whore to wife just by switching towns. Lila froze. Eli stepped forward, calm, no fury in his stride, no fire in his eyes. "I do not hit weak men," he said. The boy blinked, confused. "But if you say one more thing about her," Eli continued, voice like gravel rolling slow, "I'll make sure you forget how to walk." The words hit harder than any fist. The boy backed off, mumbling curses he no longer believed in. Eli never broke eye contact, never even looked angry, just certain. Lila said nothing on the walk back. Neither did he. But that night, when she sat on the porch and watched him brush down his horse in the dark, she saw something she hadn't before. Not strength. She'd always known he was strong. What she saw was restraint. Mercy. A kind of protection that didn't draw blood but built safety around her, brick by quiet brick. She'd grown up thinking love was loud, demanding, hot like fire. But maybe it was this, a pair of mended shoes, a silence that never punished, a man who chose not to fight, unless it was to defend her dignity. And slowly, Lila began to realize. She did not fear his hands, she trusted them. The first snow came early that year. Heavy and soft, it blanketed the hills and turned the air sharp with cold. Lila woke to silence under frost, the windows veiled in ice, the scent of winter deep in the wood. Eli was already in the yard, saddling the horses. She pulled on his old wool coat, too large for her, but warm. He looked up as she approached. "You ready?" he asked. "I think so," she answered, voice shaky, not from the cold. He had been teaching her to ride for a week, said it was so she could protect herself, if ever the need came again. But she knew better. Eli didn't say things he didn't mean. If he was teaching her, it was because he believed one day she might have to run again. The mare was gentle, with kind eyes and a steady gait. Still, Lila was uneasy in the saddle. Eli led them past the fence, speaking more to the horse than to her. "Feel her with your knees, not just your hands," he said. "Let her tell you the pace." "Easy for you to say," she muttered. "You've done this since you could walk." He glanced back. "And you've lived through what would break most men. So." She said nothing after that. By mid-morning the snow thickened, wet and wind-whipped. Eli called her in. They dismounted near the barn, boots crunching over ice. He opened the stall, ushering her inside, shutting out the storm. Lila shook off her coat, shivering. Eli knelt at the iron stove, stirring coals until they glowed again, casting flickering warmth. She sat down near the fire, hugging her knees. He sat beside her, close but not touching. Minutes passed in stillness, just the crackle of wood and the quiet shifts of horses in their stalls. Then, softly, "I still have nightmares," she said. He didn't ask what kind, he only waited. "I dream of the church," she whispered. "My father screaming. Smoke. I wake up, choking, like I never stopped running." Eli turned to her, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached over and placed his hand on her chest, above her heart. Firm, steady. "Breathe," he said. She did. He didn't move his hand, just held her heartbeat with his palm, like he was telling it could rest now, that it was safe. She closed her eyes, his touch, the smell of leather and hay, the fire's warmth, the quiet of a man who wasn't afraid of her pain. She didn't know when she leaned into him. She only remembered waking hours later, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm draped gently around her. Neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. But something shifted, something that hadn't needed words to be real. Days later they rode into town for supplies. Snowbanks lined the street, and the wind bit hard at exposed skin. Lila walked with a list in hand, her breath fogging the air. People bustled past, boots stomping, children laughing, sleigh bells jangling in the distance. Then she saw him. Eli stood near the well talking to the blacksmith. One hand rested on his belt, the other gesturing as he spoke. Solid. Still. A man carved from the land, as familiar as the mountains behind him. Without thinking, she crossed to him. And for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, she didn't glance around to see who was watching. She just reached out and took his hand. Eli paused. Surprise flickered in his eyes. But he didn't pull away. Instead, he gave her fingers a gentle squeeze and kept on talking, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe, just maybe, it was. The storm didn't come with thunder. It came with a new deputy. He arrived in Jackson Ridge one cold morning, wearing a silver star and a smirk, tall, lean, pale blue eyes that blinked too little and saw too much. He introduced himself as Deputy Marshal Grady Kane, transferred from Abilene to help keep order through the winter. Eli knew something was wrong the moment he saw him, not because of what Kane said, but how he looked at Lila. Like he already knew her. Like he remembered things no decent man should. At first, Lila said nothing. She stacked supplies, swept the porch, made stew without a word. But when Kane tipped his hat and said, "Didn't expect to see you this far north, sweetheart," her hands froze mid-motion. Eli stepped forward, slow and calm. "You know my wife?" he asked. Kane grinned. Not officially. That night, Eli brought her into the barn. The wind roared outside, but inside it was warm with hay and firelight. She sat on a bale. He paced. "Tell me everything," he said. So she did. Grady Kane wasn't just one of the men who torched the church. He was the one who slit her father's throat. He'd run the whole trafficking ring, using railroad lines to smuggle native children and girls across territories. Her father had nearly exposed it. And Lila, with her memory and silence, had survived. "They think I still have the names," she whispered. "But I don't. I only remember two." Eli stopped pacing. "Doesn't matter. If he's here, they're still active." He turned, grabbed his saddlebag, started packing. "We ride west, Montana, quiet, remote, we vanish." But Lila didn't move. "If I run," she said, "they'll find someone else, another girl, another preacher." Eli's voice was tight. "This isn't your war." She met his eyes. "Yes, it is." They argued, long and quiet. He begged her to think of safety. She refused. Finally, Eli sat beside her, rubbing his hands down his face. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to testify," she said. "Real court, military. I want people to know who he is. That'll put a target on your back." "It already is." A beat of silence. Then Eli gave one small nod. "All right." They left at dawn for Fort Laramie. 4 days of bitter cold. On the third night, Lila woke to find Eli sitting under the stars, sharpening his knife. She sat beside him, rested her hand on his knee. "You don't have to stay," she whispered. "I do," he said. The trial was held in a stone room inside the fort, plain benches, iron bars, soldiers standing stiff against the walls. The judge wore a thick coat and a winter beard. Eli stood beside Lila, steady as ever. Kane was led in, shackled but smug. He smirked when he saw her, like he still owned the ending. "Miss Byrne," the judge said, "do you recognize this man?" She stepped forward. Each step a fight. "Yes," she said. "His name is Grady Kane. He murdered my father. He ran a trafficking ring using federal rail, and he told me, if I ever spoke, he'd cut my throat the same way." Kane gave a dry laugh. But Lila didn't stop. "You will not touch anyone else," she said. "You will not sell another girl. You will rot, behind bars or in the dirt." Kane lunged, metal clanging. A soldier stepped in front of her, rifle raised. She didn't flinch. The room stilled. In that moment, she wasn't the girl who once hid in kitchens and shadows. She was the reckoning. Snow melted slow that week, revealing patches of brown beneath the white mud. Stone, hoofprints long frozen, now softened into slush. The wind at Fort Laramie had lost some of its bite, but inside its stone walls, the chill never left. Eli had spent 3 days speaking with the military judge. Late nights, quiet negotiations, papers signed behind closed doors, men in uniform whispering when they thought no one heard. They had agreed, finally, to let Lila testify, but under armed protection. Still, Eli knew better. He knew what came next. No matter the verdict, no matter the chains on Grady Kane's wrists, there would be others. Quiet men in faraway towns. Names Lila did not remember. Faces hidden by shadows and uniforms. The kind of danger that did not wear a badge but carried one. She would never be safe again. So Eli prepared the wagon. He did not tell her at first, just fixed the axle, packed rations, sharpened his knife, and laid it beneath the seat. 2 horses. Enough supplies for 2 weeks riding west, through mountains. Beyond reach, a place they could disappear into. But Lila noticed. She saw the way he checked the harness straps 3 times. How he spoke less than usual. How he looked at her not with worry, but with farewell. That evening, while soldiers lit lamps and the judge went over his notes, Lila found Eli in the stables. He stood beside the wagon, tightening the tarp. "You're not planning to stay for the verdict," she said quietly. Eli turned. "I am planning for if we need to leave before it." Her heart clenched. "You still think I should run?" "I think," he said, "that you've done more than anyone ever asked you to." He paused. "And I think if we stay, you won't live long." Silence pressed between them. Lila stepped closer. Her voice broke when she spoke. "If I leave, would you come with me?" Eli didn't hesitate. "I'll be wherever you are," he said. "Forest, desert, mountain, you name it. I don't care what it's called, as long as I'm with you." She closed her eyes. Tears didn't fall, not this time. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small, old, worn, a simple gold ring, bent slightly on one side, the inside still engraved with the faintest initials, E, M, and C, M. It had belonged to his first wife. Eli had offered it to her quietly on the day they signed the marriage papers. No vows, no ceremony. Just that ring in the palm of his hand and a nod that said, "This is yours if you want it." She had never worn it. Until now. The next morning, she stood before the courtroom again. Her hair was pulled back, her coat buttoned high, her boots muddy but firm beneath her. As the judge called her name, Lila took a breath and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit, and when she walked to the stand, she did not tremble. Eli watched from the corner, arms crossed, face unreadable, but his eyes followed her like a prayer. They left Fort Laramie just after dawn. The sky was pale and stretched wide, and for a few quiet miles, the road felt almost safe. Lila sat beside Eli in the wagon, wrapped in a wool blanket, her gloved fingers resting lightly on his knee. Neither of them spoke much. There were no words left that hadn't already been lived. She had done it, spoken the truth, named the monster, faced every eye in the courtroom without flinching. Eli had never looked prouder, but safety was a fragile thing in the West, and peace never lasted long. They were only an hour outside the fort when the shot rang out. The horses reared, and Eli cursed, grabbing the reins. A second shot cracked through the cold air, splintering the wagon rail beside Lila's head. "Down!" he shouted, throwing himself across her. She hit the floorboards as Eli's body covered hers, heavy, warm, and trembling. A third shot fired. Then, silence. It was over in seconds, but blood moved slower. Lila felt it first, warm and seeping through his shirt, onto her dress. She looked up and saw his face tighten, jaw clenched against pain. "You're hit," she whispered, her voice breaking. He nodded once, shoulder maybe more. She pushed him off gently, saw the red bloom spreading fast beneath his coat. Panic clawed at her throat, but Eli's hand caught hers. "Do not scream," he said. "Don't give them a reason to come back." She nodded, teeth chattering. He slid off the wagon, stumbling once, and fired into the trees. One warning shot, one final command. Then he fell to his knees. Lila jumped down after him, tearing fabric from her dress to press against the wound. His breathing came hard and shallow, eyes fluttering. "Stay with me," she begged. He smiled, faint and bloody. "Now you know what it means, to be a wife." "Don't," she whispered, "don't say goodbye." But his eyes closed. And for a terrible moment, she thought that was it. Then, the sound of hoofbeats broke through the trees. A rider appeared, tall, wrapped in furs, face painted in red ochre, a Comanche. The man dismounted quickly, knelt beside Eli, checked the wound with practiced hands. Lila stared in disbelief. "I know this man," the Comanche said. "He saved my brother years ago. I pay it now." He lifted Eli with ease, motioning for Lila to bring the horses. They rode fast and silent to a nearby village, tucked between the hills, sheltered from the road and known to few. The healer worked through the night, herbs and poultices, firelight and prayer. Lila did not sleep. She held Eli's hand through it all, whispering things she had never dared say before. By morning he breathed easier. By the third day, he opened his eyes. "You stayed," he croaked. She smiled, tears falling freely now. "You idiot," she said. "Where else would I go?" That afternoon, as snow fell soft outside the hut, Lila found an old razor on the shelf. She warmed water, found a cloth, and pulled up a stool beside Eli's bed. He blinked. "What are you doing?" "Something a wife would do," she said. She lathered the soap with care, tilting his chin gently. Her hands moved slow, steady. He did not flinch, not once. And in that moment, there was no past, no danger, no courtroom, just the scent of cedar smoke, the warmth of breath between them, and the sound of his heartbeat beneath her touch. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was home. Spring came late to the plains that year, but when it did, it came in gold. The grass returned first, green and thick, waving like silk under the wind. Then, the wildflowers bloomed, stubborn and bright, coloring the hills like forgotten hymns. Eli walked with a cane now, but he walked. Each step slower than before, but sure. Lila never left his side. They did not return to Jackson Ridge, nor Fort Laramie. No one would remember their names out there, and that was how they wanted it. Together, they bought a patch of land near the border of Montana, rolling hills, a creek that sang at night, and enough sky to lose every memory in. They built a cabin from scratch, side by side. Her hands blistered, his shoulder ached, but they laughed more than they ever had. No more whispers, no more glances, just them. And the land. Their days filled with ordinary things, mending fences, hauling water, breaking bread. But every glance carried history, every touch, a promise. On one particular night, the sky opened wide, silver with moonlight. The wind was soft, the earth warm beneath them. Lila lay in the grass outside their home, her fingers spread like roots into the soil. Above her, the stars burned quiet. Eli lay beside her, arms tucked behind his head, gaze lost somewhere in the heavens. She turned to him. "I think I finally know what it means," she whispered. "What does?" "To be a wife." He didn't move, didn't blink, just let the words drift between them like pollen. But after a moment, he turned his head and looked at her. "You don't have to know anything," he said softly. "You just have to be here." She smiled. "I'm not going anywhere." He reached for her then, pulled her close until her head rested on his chest, their bodies folded into the land like they belonged to it, like they had always been there, just waiting to be found. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at the grass. A horse neighed in the distance. The old gold ring glinted faintly on Lila's finger, catching moonlight, worn, imperfect, but still whole, just like them. They breathed together, slow and steady, letting the earth hold them as they held each other. No past, no future, just this, just now. Under a silver Wyoming moon, two scarred souls found something the law couldn't grant: belonging. No bloodlines, no vows, just love that lasted, quiet as breath between stars and grass. If this story moved you, hit like to keep the Wild West spirit alive, and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more untamed romance and forbidden glances. Tell us in the comments, what part hit you hardest? Until next time, where bullets missed, but hearts didn't.